It is March 1st, 1555, when the book Les Prophéties, it means the Prophecies, is published by Masbonhomme in Lyon. Its author, the French physician Michel de Nostredame, later known only as Nostradamus, deals with the history of mankind, but also, and above all, predicts with his four-line verses a number of events of the near and distant future. The book causes a stir at the time of its release. Some regard it as the work of a madman and a fraud. Others believe his prophecies implicitly. And it is much the same today, almost half a millennium later. Nostradamus's admirers and supporters are convinced that he was able to predict the rise of Adolf Hitler in the deep Middle Ages, the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, or the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Not much is known about Nostradamus's childhood and youth. He was born in December 1503 in French town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. He was one of 8 children of a grain merchant. But he didn't have much time to raise children, so grandfather took care of his son's education. Jean de Saint-Rémy, an avid collector and connoisseur of herbs. It was he who most influenced little Michel and led him to become a doctor. Nostradamus first enters the University of Avignon. There, however, his studies in rhetoric and logic are interrupted by a plague that breaks out at the school. So, in just 1 year of his studies, he leaves and begins to pursue the hobby that his grandfathers brought him to. For next 8 years, he'll be traveling around Europe collecting all sorts of herbs. He first tries their effects on himself, and when he is convinced that he has enough experience, he starts to make a living as a healer. Although he's successful as an herbalist, it is not enough for him. He wants to advance and deepen his knowledge. And so, at the age of 26, he enrolls as a medical student at the University of Montpellier. But even there, he doesn't stay long. The university administration does not like his herbalism, which at the time is considered incompatible with modern medicine, and expels Nostradamus from studies. A disgraced young man goes to visit his friend in the French town of Agen and returns to what he was paid for until now, treating the sick. It is while visiting one of his patients that he meets his future wife, Henriette, whom he marries in 1531. Soon after, their son is born, and soon after that, a daughter. But the family happiness is to last only 3 years. Then the plague strikes again. Both his wife and his 2 children die of the disease. Nostradamus is deeply affected by the loss of loved ones. He moves again, this time to Marseille, the epicenter of the epidemic. There, he is horrified to discover that most doctors of the time relied on methods to treat the plague that often did more harm than good. The sick undergo bloodletting or are wrapped in garlic-soaked clothes. Based on his knowledge, Nostradamus promotes revolutionary methods for that time in the fight against the deadly epidemic. Regular hand washing, disinfecting surfaces with vinegar and covering mouth and nose. At the same time, he makes tablets from rose hips, which are rich in vitamin C, which provide relief for patients with mild symptoms. When the epidemic subsides, Nostradamus begins to devote himself fully to another of his passions, astrology. It may seem paradoxical, but it was not far from medicine at the time. Doctors were convinced that health is influenced by the position of the Sun, Mars, or Venus. But Nostradamus added a whole new dimension. He began to relate the movements of the planets and their relative positions to events that had taken place in the past. At the same time, he calculated when the same constellations, and with them similar events, would be repeated again. The 47-years-old Nostradamus made his first comprehensive prediction for the following year in 1550, followed by others. but without any significant response. But then comes the year 1555 and the first edition of the Book of Prophecy. It will be the turning point. In it, the author predicts with uncanny accuracy the death of the French king Henry II. The young lion overcomes the old in a personal duel. His eyes pierced with a golden lattice. 2 wounds merge into one. The old lion then dies a cruel death. Four years later, Henry II is actually injured in a tournament. A young nobleman, Gabriel Montgomery, cuts his eye with a spear, and Henry gets an infection in the wound. After 10 days, he dies. From that moment to this day, Nostradamus interpreters have been trying to deduce from his books what he correctly predicted. It's not clear-cut. His 4-line verses, which are supposed to reveal the future, are written in a hard-to-understand Provençal dialect of French, mixed with Latin, Greek, and Italian. Their translations are often very different from each other. The same verse can then be a prediction of 2 completely different events. So usually the way it works is that the event has to happen first, and then Nostradamus's admirers come along and say that he was able to predict it 5 centuries ago. After the death of Henry II, Nostradamus, at that time already a well-known herbalist and healer, suddenly became a renowned oracle. The French Queen Catherine de' Medici, widow of the late king, immediately appointed him personal physician to her son Charles IX. Nostradamus, a low-born man from humble rural origins, thus made an admirable career for his time. But he is also getting older and is showing ailments that he cannot effectively treat. He suffers from gout and arthritis. In the second half of 1565, his condition deteriorated significantly. Because of the swelling, he can hardly move and his heart is failing. At the end of June 1566, he invites his lawyer to his house and writes his last will with him. At the age of 62, Nostradamus dies. Even today, historians cannot agree on the exact date. But, according to legend, one of the most famous fortune-tellers in history was supposed to have said this line to his maid the day before he died. "You won't find me alive at sunrise."